that there's so much history and so many projects that are represented by the gallery program that we thought we'd have this, it would be better to address what we do in this way in a kind of larger format, but also with a mind toward the evolving pandemic situation, which has basically made our exhibition spaces off limits. We learned actually for the full year, as far as we understand. So the whole idea of what a physical exhibition space is, what a gallery is, and how we as a institution, an organization that up until March of last year this year was sort of preoccupied with this thing we call exhibition making. We've had to rethink what that might be and how to actually talk about that with you all as you think about your work and how you present it and share it with the world. So this is just a kind of quick way to talk about the gallery program, our history, but also to look at ways in the past during which we've sort of seen little instances of the gallery going beyond the box of literally the box of the white cube, as we call it. And so we wanted to start with a kind of maybe a very productive generative image to look at. Many of us know this work thanks to a book called Inside the White Cube by Brian O'Doherty that was written published in 1976 based on essays that in a way provide the first history of the gallery space as we had it back then. And this is a fascinating picture. It was actually in Philadelphia a few years ago at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. And it serves as a way to talk about a number of things. One of the things I want to make sure I say about it is that it is depicting an actual gallery in the Louvre called the Salon Carré. This room in the Louvre exists. But what the painter has done is to sort of fabricate some of the details, but it is a record of some of the greatest works in the Louvre that were not necessarily always in this particular gallery. The artist, you may know from his other job, which was the inventor of the Morse code. And this was his last painting. He started it in Paris, in the Louvre, and he actually made many copies. Maybe we can go to the next slide. There you'll see that this image of a painting studio, hung salon style, maybe we'll get into that in a minute, is a public space and a public institution, but it's also functioning as a social space. And I don't know right now who that man in the turban is, but he's copying one of the pictures in the gallery. And that's what Morse did in order to make this record of the Louvre. And this painting, as you can see, was finished in 1833, still 6 years prior to the invention of photography. So it's important to put this in context and to step back a little bit. Morse's intention, and it's interesting that he would go on to invent the Morse code, because communication was his priority here. He wanted to make a painting that could travel the United States and in a way bring all of these great masterpieces to the communities of the United States to show that, to advocate for the important role that art needed to have in a democratic society. So there was even a kind of political agenda here. But it is so many more things than that. The circle around at the bottom there, you can see, is circling the Mona Lisa, which now, if many of you have been to the Louvre, is in a room by itself. So this picture also shows us the way in which pictures were apparently appropriately and understandably and acceptably shown in a way in the 1830s, which sort of gives such priority to the frame. To the modern eye, as Brian O'Doherty talks, this is maybe too much information. It looks like a Pinterest page maybe, And these analogies are natural to sort of think about ways in which, so much information can be shared. And the painting, definitely did not have the success that Morse wanted, but as an emblem of what the gallery space is, and this idea also of the exhibition installation view. Exhibitions, as we know them, are temporary. They are not permanent, and that is one of the beautiful things about them. If we're going to be asking the question, what is an exhibition? One of the primary conditions of the exhibition is that it is not permanent, and so it's provisional. It's a kind of statement. It's a proposition. It's a kind of maybe thinking out loud with objects in spaces. And what I want to encourage as we go forward is to think about how some of the things that we know exhibitions can do can happen without the white cube and the physical exhibition space. So this is just to bring us to Arcadia. This is a picture from 1935 showing what we call Spruance now, the Spruance Art Center, and that with the gallery and the painting studio being the building on the right with the smokestack, just to remind everybody who has never been to these spaces that initially it was a power plant. And inside the building at the to the right of that gap where the tree is were two large boilers that generated the electricity that was initially used to construct all the historic buildings on campus. And for many, many years, it was, Matt, you can maybe help me here. This was where is this where the servants lived, or was that, I forget.
No, we don't think so at this point. The buildings to the left would have primarily been workshops for a maintenance staff, be that blacksmith area, machine shop, wood shop, etc.
This was not turned into a gallery space until 1985, and we'll touch on that later. But this is just to give you a sense of the campus back in 35. Here's other views from the 80s. The smokestack is iconic for us now. It's a very easy way to identify the location of the gallery. What's not easy to point out to people is the entrance of this exhibition space, which is not visible in these photographs. It looks like it would be the sort of cornice in the center, but that's actually an entrance to the painting studio. So the entrance is to the right of that building. You go underneath that little overhang there. So that's what we're learning, is that that's one of the difficulties of the space, is that its entrance is not apparent to a lot of the students, and they have to be brought into the gallery before they even understand that we have a program here. Let's keep going. So this is a view of the other exhibition spaces we have on campus. It's the beautiful shot of the Commons that holds two exhibition spaces, which were initiated in 2012. There's another entrance on the other side. Many of you may be familiar with this moment in the building where if you go down, you get to what we call the Rosedale Gallery, and up the stairs is the Harrison Gallery. The space upstairs was intended and designed as an exhibition space with walls that actually are hinged to the larger wall and can be moved in various positions. We don't really take advantage of that, but it's a carpeted space, and you can see this is an exhibition by Krista Profit, part of our Spotlight series, and it does show off the paintings very well. And then downstairs is a space that was not initially intended to be an exhibition space, but we appropriated as such. It's initially a lobby space outside the great room, and it's lit by fluorescent lights, which actually provide pretty adequate, even lighting for Krista's paintings in this show. So those are three of the four spaces, and then the last space that we definitely want to shout out about is the Judith Taylor Gallery, named for Judith Taylor, a photography instructor who died unexpectedly in 2010. And this is a space that's dedicated specifically for the use of students only. And all the exhibitions here are presented by students. It's for students. It's something that we really want to encourage people to use when, of course, we return back to campus. So this is another view of the Spruance Center, probably taken exactly around this time a few years ago. There's one of the first gallery directors, Zena Davis, standing again in what was once a painting studio before it turned into a gallery as a result of an accident with a picture window, which we'll go into at some other point. But the point that this space again was never designed for exhibitions, but for the studio practice before it was a boiler room before that. We'll keep going. So this is two views of the interior of the space from '85. We see one of the first shows installed. The space is something we all have a lot of feelings for because it's so much like a chapel. It mixes daylight with electric light. The proportions are gorgeous, and it has these tiled walls, which we'll be talking about later. And I want to draw your attention to the fact that early on, the windows that you see on the left, the picture on the left, those windows were eventually covered to create more wall space for exhibitions. It's a kind of interesting trick because if you walk around the building, the windows appear to be open from outside, but they're shut on the inside. And the image on the right is from an exhibition for local artist named Astrid Bowlby that we did in 2017. So we renamed the gallery program a few years ago because we went from being a program with one space to these 4 spaces that we talked about. So we wanted to also underscore the idea of the exhibition as a medium. We really enjoy what exhibition making can do for art and our students, and we try to make it interesting for ourselves as often as we can. So we really do sort of exercise this idea of the exhibition as a medium of itself, with all kinds of parameters and limitations like any medium. But we also do events, we have commissioned artworks, we do research. We now have a collection that we manage in different spaces on campus and an archive. And we do a lot of publications as well. So it's still the umbrella, the word exhibition sort of is one way to cover all of that activity, which we'll get into a little bit next. So we wanted to bring forward a number of projects from the history of the gallery. This is from 1990. When Paula Marincola was the director, a project just called Flag Balls by Donald Lipsky, very interesting artist. And at the time, in terms of the cultural climate, this was a kind of hot potato to be making art out of the American flag. So it was a loaded subject, to say the least. And then the project would involved, the artist there on his left, on your left, making the work with the students. And I don't know exactly how many American flags were involved in creating this ball, it's not flags all the way into the center. I think there's a structure, an armature around which the flags are being tied. But the point here somehow is that this project used the outside of the gallery space, that front lawn, as an exhibition space as well, a public site. But then inside, sort of, there were a selection of smaller balls, almost like a kind of incubator for the large ball in the front. The narratives that you could assemble were many, but it just shows you the gallery looking very much like a white cube. The curator, the director, painted the gallery floor white, I think, to actually emphasize the container aspect, the sort of almost this incubator idea of the gallery space. So we're talking about, in a way, the public spaces. And this is another example, I think, very telling in terms of the students' ways in which they could think about the exhibition and its form, and where the studio might be located, and have access to public exposure. The New York City subway is a incredible public space, and Keith Haring made it his own in a unique way when he started to recognize that these black pieces of paper that cover the advertising after it's expired, as you know, all those ads are paid for, but they only last a certain amount of time, and the minute the sort of expiration date happens, they get covered with a black piece of paper. He saw an opportunity there to recognize the that surface as a blackboard or a drawing surface or a canvas, if you will. And he was equipped, always had chalk with him. If we could go to the next slide. There he is getting arrested on the left for, in a way, defacing public property. Graffiti and its legacy is a huge subject in the 70s, 80s, and even now. But this is his first body of work that went public and viral. People love these things. They tore them, or cut them very carefully, I should say, from these frames. And we were lucky to have access to a small collection of this material that we showed in 2011. And in this case, we're sort of trying to echo on the left. You see the installation shot of these drawings. And remember, these were never meant to be removed from their frames on the subway. People with a lot of foresight did it very carefully, and they're very valuable now. And so what we tried to do was to bring that feeling of the subway to the exhibition space. And I think I failed to mention the ceramic tiles that are original to the building and behind all of the sheetrock walls that were constructed to basically transform the power station interior into an exhibition space. And Matt Borgen on the left built this beautiful bench echoing the design of the subway benches that you can still see throughout the city, to sort of create that feeling of the subway. Even the way the pictures are hung is echoing the way that advertisements would be experienced in the subway. And then a second time, we're sort of pointing to those ceramic tiles, which created an incredible opportunity for us in the spring of 2017, when, as you may know, thinking about the election next week, back in the fall of 2016, the November 9th was a day that many of us will never forget. The surprise election of Donald Trump took a lot of people by, as a form of shock that this artist, Matthew Leve Chavez, had been working in the subway, meeting people and just talking with people, giving them the chance to sort of address their feelings, and sort of like being a kind of vernacular, therapist in the subway there. And little did he know, of course, that that I don't think he was ready for what was going to be happening on the 9th of November. But he acted very quickly, and as he brought his table and chairs to the subway that day, made sure he had a stack of Post-it notes. And this thing went viral. People, was basically encouraging people to express how they felt on the Post-it notes that he brought to the subway that morning. And within hours, the people were doing their own version of this, setting up the subway. It went from New York to other cities with subways. And for our exhibition that spring, we had a cancellation, and we were trying to figure out what to do that would respond to the moment, politically, emotionally. And we thought that this would be a great thing to bring to Arcadia, especially given the nature of the ceramic tiles in our walls. You can see the color is almost identical. So we got Matthew to agree to work with us, and he loved the idea of us removing we removed one entire wall in the gallery. You can see the students were helping the process there, exposing it was such a beautiful thing to see after only being able to see the top of this wall, and to know for sure that it went all the way down to the floor. And then we set up all the Post-it notes from 14th Street, or not all of them, there were thousands, but a good many of them were basically rearranged on the gallery wall on the left. And then on the right, we did our own version to sort of extend the project to Arcadia, and invited people to put up their own notes in response to the moment. So you can see that there's one example. It's very specific to Arcadia, and another incredible one. I don't know who did the one with in the next slide of the United States, sort of on different color Post-its, which I think is incredibly telling expression. It was like, even without words, it says so much. And we still have these Post-it notes, which is great. So in a way, all you need is some Post-it notes, and you have an exhibition in a way. To some extent. And then the next project is a kind of variation on the beauty of works on paper. So Ray Johnson, a figure from the 50s and 60s, he's often credited with being a kind of precursor to Warhol and Lichtenstein for sort of being one of the first to work with pop motifs, and could be credited with inventing pop art by some. Decided he was frustrated with the gallery system, and decided to use the U.S. postal system to circumvent that gallery system. And he, for example, you can see at the top, it says, "Please add to and send to." So he used the photocopier, very gifted draftsman, created all these sort of figures. You can see this is, he invented something called the New York Correspondence School, kind of a joke on in a way, the idea of teaching through the mail, but instead of using the mail system as a way to receive and send art. And so there's some other examples of this practice, which he basically started in 1962 and continued up until his death in the 80s. Committed suicide by jumping off one of the bridges over the, well, I forget which river it was, but he, by that time, he was what they called the most famous unknown artist. And he wrote, he was so connected with so many people, and was, spent hours every day sending out postcards and these photocopies with instructions to send them on to other people, so that, there was this layered communication. Some say very much like a kind of precursor of the internet. Here's a postcard to Sam Watzknecht, the director of the Wadsworth Athenaeum. And we had access to a bunch of materials. See all those boxes on the left there? There's 11 boxes that were bequeathed by Ray Johnson to one of his correspondents named Robert. What was his last name? I forget. But we called these things the Bob boxes, because his name was Rob, and he basically Ray Johnson decided to meet Rob at a certain place, and they arranged to transfer these boxes, and Bob had them for the longest time. And he didn't even open them until a few years ago, and before 2011 when we did the show. And so what the exhibition was basically a chance to look at the contents of all of these boxes, which were displayed on these tables. That's the name of the exhibition, Table of Contents, and we could talk a whole hour about titles, but that's another thing. But so here's in a way, what we're looking at is an archive that we put on temporary display with some of Johnson's beautiful collages, which we borrowed from his gallery in New York. But the point is to look at this tradition of mail art or correspondence art as a way to, in this case, the gallery becomes almost like a shrine or a kind of place to share this work. And Arcadia is great because we're not a museum. We don't worry about thousands of people coming to the gallery every day, and we could display this material without the kinds of risks or concerns that you would have at a museum. And that's one of the things we really enjoy about the space, is that it has a kind of intimacy. One of the challenges, of course, is that it requires a 45-minute ride from Center City, the fact that we try to make the visit worth the trouble to get there. And the shows have a kind of density, as you can see here, and a kind of access to the content that you might not always get at other venues. going forward, there's some other details. I want to point out that if you can see, there's an image of James Dean, and one of the famous examples of Ray's work from the 50s is a collage with James Dean. He also worked with Elvis Presley that sort of give him that ability to claim the stature of one of the first people to be called a pop artist. But he also mailed all kinds of objects to the. I think he famously mailed that there's a mask of a rabbit that he mailed, and all the stuff that was there was at one point mailed through the U.S. postal system, which, as we know, is a kind of critical service that is important to sort of celebrate again. Let's keep going. So here's a project we did with a young British artist named Daniel Eatock, who had a reputation as a designer, who came up with a motif that was used to publicize the show called, it was a British reality show called, I'm forgetting, where a bunch of young people live in the same house together for a while.
Big Brother.
Thank you. So he earned his rent money on that, and was free to sort of make art in the meantime. And he published a book by Princeton Architectural Press, and the editor there suggested that he might have a good time with us at Arcadia. And we did this interesting project where the gallery sort of became a studio, working, and Daniel was working with the students directly to make a lot of the work in the show. There's these thumbprints that you see on the back. The project, which you can look at online, he has an incredible website and a free, you can actually just borrow his own web format. It's called InDesign or IndExhibit, I think. But so here's a sign that Jamar made, encouraging the students to come in and get their thumbs printed. And then the project was that to create a narrative using the pattern, every student's pattern thumbprint became a kind of almost version of line paper to sort of tell a story about who they were. And Daniel showed, I think, 40 examples of these works made by the students in the space of just a few days as a kind of an assignment that became art. And there's another slide. This is a student named Lauren Garvey, who was very skilled became an abstract painter, but she had chops and being able to represent things. And what she did was make these watercolors on the gallery wall using water from bottles. So basically she made a little still life depicting the actual bottle of water to scale, but using the water in the packaged drinking water to transfer the medium from the watercolor palette to the wall. And so it literally a kind of, not only an image of the water bottle, but made with the water being depicted, which is sort of his MO over and over again. He's always doing these things that are about themselves to some extent. And another project, there on the left is a bunch of accidental pictures taken of camera straps that he used, that gathered from the internet, and he uses the internet as a sort of resource all the time. Some of you who know the gallery would appreciate that he wanted the door taken off the light that usually covers all the light switches. He wanted to expose that. And then in another project, he had us set up a bunch of Pantone pens in the actual sequence that the Pantone sells the pens to display the color chart there. And basically over the course of a month and a half during the show, those pens were upright on a pads of paper. And we didn't get to see what they were really making until the show was over. And you can see on the right there how far the pen's ink sort of got absorbed into the sheets. And we sold all of these on the internet. So we used the internet again as a kind of place to sell these works, which were priced at according to the number of people who were actually wanting them. So I think some of the pictures were only like $1. So it was not mercenary or profit driven at all, but very much about sharing this experience with people. Let's keep going. We're almost done. Another project involved an idea that he had and did once without documenting it, where he went to the ocean, in this case, the Atlantic Ocean, and with somebody named Aaron Eigler from Greenhouse Media, who documented every aspect of this project. Daniel going to the ocean with a glass, an empty drinking glass, from my own kitchen, and he carried it from the beach all the way to the gallery, using public transportation and having Aaron document every second. It was quite a feat, and I think Daniel's hand was very sore at the end, but he placed that glass, which was initially full of ocean water, next to the monitor there, so visitors could see the tape and then look at the water as it evaporated slowly out of the glass, the salt, encrusted with salt water, with salt crystals, as it evaporated. Let's keep going. We're almost done here. This is from a more recent project, a show from a few years ago by Spencer Finch. It's called Back to Canvas, and it's a kind of gallery version of a project that also has a permanent life at a place called Crystal Bridges, where there's a billboard placed outside. What you're looking at are colors that are sourced from the central portion of the Wizard of Oz. Each one of those colors matches things like the Emerald City or the Dorothy's shoes. And what Spencer is interested in is the fact that as the daylight disappears and at dusk arrives, the colors disappear from the human ability to see those colors as they are meant to be. Basically, they all fade to gray at some point, just as the film does. The beginning and end of The Wizard of Oz, as you know, is our black and white portions, and so this is another example of how a work that works in the white cube, but it can also work in the exhibition and outside, exposed to the elements as well. And another artist who has mastered the art of making art on the fly, very famously recently making portraits of herself in airplane restrooms. And we don't have the time to look at that, but you really got to look at the airplane portraits. She had does a project with book titles, where she basically rearranges the titles of books in libraries. And for example, the one on the right is called The Day at the Beach. And it's just, as you can see, it's just titles of book spines lined up to sort of create a short story or a poem that she then takes a picture of. And we displayed this in the gallery in a show called A Given Circumstance, about this kind of work being made in public spaces or in given circumstances. And here it's a very maybe timely example of a project called Monument to the Unelected. She looked at the history of the presidential elections in this country and basically made a sign for all of the losers of every election in the sort of design format of the last 20 or so years, but going all the way back to the first, second, and third elections, all the way up to the 2008. But a really kind of brilliant use of the lawn as a kind of both public space, private space, and a display space with its own parameters that maybe will inspire some of you to think about public space in a different way. I think we have one more slide before we can get to some questions, hopefully. There's a great class that Elizabeth Farrell has been teaching called Make an Exhibition, that has sort of invited students to work with material we have in our own collections on campus. She's done it twice now, once with a historic publication called Camera Work that we were gifted a few years ago. Alfred Stieglitz and his circle, basically using the magazine as a exhibition vehicle, in a way, a sort of way to get photographs out into the public. And then another project using our outdoor sculpture as a sort of resource to celebrate the works we have on our campus and to sort of address questions about how they're being used or how they might be better enjoyed by our community. So I'm hoping that gives us some basis for talking about what an exhibition can be, what it might be, how each of you might reinvent this idea of the exhibition on your own for your work, making that you would make during your time at Arcadia and beyond. So I'm hoping there might be some questions or comments.
I just have a question about the ocean cup project from a few slides ago.
Right, the water glass, yeah.
Yes, it's just the balloon. How is that incorporated into the message of this?
Okay, that's a very excellent and a fair question. The balloon is part of another project. It's actually acting badly because it's not supposed to be. Static electricity has basically brought the balloon that's part of another sculpture. And I think this was a photograph taken, yeah, that's a more, so that balloon is breath, and it's attached to another balloon that you can't see, which is a balloon filled with helium. And so the artist was kind of making a sculpture, trying to take advantage of the height of the space. So it's a very long cord that connects those two balloons. And he basically wanted to make a subject of the fact that our breath is full of moisture and is heavier than helium. So what you're seeing is the balloon misbehaving and that being documented by somebody else. So that's an unauthorized photograph, but it brings to bear, in a way, the fact that an exhibition is a place where stuff like this happens and documentation ends up living online. And yeah, that is not what the artist wanted to happen, but it's very much part of the conversation that his work addresses, which is what do materials do? And how can we play with phenomena? And so he might be very amused by your question, and I'm glad you brought that up. In terms of inadvertent, readings of artworks, we can't never control how actually this is another point I could make that your question provides a platform for, which is the fact that when you are in your studio and you're talking about your work with your instructors or your friends or your family, you're in control of that conversation. And you can talk about something that doesn't have a title yet, maybe, but the exhibition is a place where you're typically not there to manage how your work gets seen or to control the discourse around it. And so the exhibition, if anything else I can tell you about it, besides it being a temporary place, it's a place that is sort of where the artist is absent by almost, and that's being a good thing, and the advantage of the fact where the work has to speak for itself. It will live and die. It will thrive or fail on view in a way that it might never behave in the same way in the studio, where there's a lot of care and nurturing and maybe a little bit of hesitation and shyness, whereas the gallery, the exhibition space is a place where the work has to be strong enough and be able to speak for itself without the artist interfering. So I hope.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Any other thoughts or comments or questions?
You could also type it in the chat if you don't want to speak.
So what does 2020 look like for the gallery space, for Arcadia and what you're seeing, like, I guess, out in the world?
That's a good question. We are right now trying to figure out how to replace the fact that the exhibitions that we had scheduled for this year were postponed. And in a way, it's great that Molly has focused on this postcard project by Ray Johnson, because one of the things we're actively doing right now, we've just reached out to an Arcadian alum who manages a print studio in New York. And it's sort of in relation to the show that got canceled. We were ordinarily, without COVID, we would have been looking at a show called Proto-Feminism in the Print Studio, which was looking at a bunch of artists, all women, who at one point or another had made work at a place called Atelier 17 that was initially in Paris and then moved to New York, managed by a printmaker named Samuel Hayter. And so because we can't do that show, we're thinking about how we can still address the printmaking process, hopefully to engage artists and commission them to make postcards. Because what we're thinking about right now is how tired and exhausted we are of the experience of looking at screens. And, you know, it's ironic, here we are gathered around our laptops. And the idea of, you know, the other day, Jamar sent me a beautiful Ray Johnson inspired pamphlet in the mail, and I didn't know it was coming. And it reminded me again of the beauty of the US Postal Service and what a joy it is to get an unsolicited, unexpected piece of mail, especially from someone you know that relates to something that you share. And it's just, especially at this time when people are so hungry for connection, we thought that it would be nice to do something using the mail system that would still involve commissioning artists and some way to be generous and address that need for engagement that the mail has always delivered, as it were, but to sort of actually, you know, do this in a very conscious way. So that's one way in which we're sort of replacing what's been missing. We've also started a conversation with a experimental theater group that we hope to be working with in the spring. Again, this students on campus. It's maybe too early to say anything specific about it, but we are trying in our own way to reinvent what it means to make an exhibition when we don't have the physical spaces. We've talked about a lot of ways in which the campus provides, like that smokestack above the gallery looks, I mean, we're thinking about how that could be a billboard in some way for messaging if we could get a projection to work there, but that's got its own problems. But so that's, I hope that begins to answer your question. I appreciate you asking it. I don't know if Matt or Jamar or Molly want to add anything, but we are consciously thinking about how to replace the white cube while we don't have access to it.
It looks like we have another good question in the chat here. Jamar, if you want to shout it out.
Sure. How often are there interactive elements in the exhibitions? Is it something that you try to include since the gallery is on a college campus? Or does it just come with the artist's wishes and ideas?
That's a great question. I would go back to that one image of the Ray Johnson show, because that was the fact that we could put that material on view and let people handle it says something about, you know, one aspect of the interactivity. Another project that we don't, actually we could we go show the slide of the Grove. Maybe that's an excellent example of interactive work. This was an exhibition called Free Play, where that is the image on the right is a work by a Philadelphia artist named Jenny Shanker that she remade. And this show was all about hands-on experiences in a way that everything was a game or a toy in some way that was designed to be used by the gallery visitors. And in the case on the right, there was a little a game with marbles, and the idea was that you could, it's almost taking this kind of little handset with a little thing you find in a bubble gum machine, and sort of making it more, putting it on a seesaw like that, so the two people could sort of get the ball through the gate on either side. And that was really fun. And then there were, Yoko Ono was in the show with a chessboard of all white pieces on a grid that with all white surface, so there was no way to know, what was black or white. But I do want to get to this thing called The Grove by Sean Duffy, which was an exhibition that included, I think, 18 turntables. Or do we still have it in the? No, we took it out. Sorry. Never mind. But yeah, we do. We encourage this kind of interactivity all the time, and there's the history is loaded with all kinds of ways in which artists, the gallery with the artists. I think, in some cases it's part of the design of the artwork, but we definitely encourage contact that is much more intimate than what you would find in a more public institution.
Maybe just to add to that, Richard, real quick, and I wouldn't give us credit for being super deliberate about this, but I think if anything, this sort of interactivity definitely plays against most people's perceptions of what a museum or a gallery is like, in terms of that kind of authoritarian, can't touch anything. And I think we end up working with people that try to make the space more accessible. And even though you're always dealing with that impression, but you're also sort of working against it at the same time.
We have another question from the chat. I think we have time for maybe one or two more. How would one get their artwork in an exhibition? Do you have to apply for it, or is it selected by your professor? And also, Richard, before you answer, you may want to give a plug for Biennial.
Yeah. So the most reliable, and in terms of the fixture of our schedule, in terms of the curriculum, is that every spring there's what we call the senior thesis exhibition. So all the graduating seniors within the art department have a chance to share their thesis in the exhibition that happens. It opens the last Friday of April, and you'll be hearing about that more and more as you continue to be at Arcadia. There's also every other year we have. What was there something else I should say there? Or
no, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
And then the biennial, which used to be an exhibition selected by faculty, is something we revised 15 years ago now. It's a chance every other year for artists enrolled in the program at any level, from first year to seniors, to have their work looked at by an outside curator, a professional that we've hired to actually jury an exhibition from work by students. And the people that have done this have been curators at the National Gallery in Washington, curators at the Institute of Contemporary Art here in Philadelphia, people with reputations that are very happy to be able to do this for us and actually come back and talk about their experience and the work. So yeah, that's two ways to do it. But I'll finish with the plug for the Judith Taylor Gallery in the library. This is a space that I would hope would have a waiting list of in non-pandemic times, of artists and curators, students who want to maybe organize shows of other artists' work, including their fellow students. This is a beautiful space in the library that is open to anyone who wants to make a proposal. So, and Matt Borgen can share some of the details about that. I think they're right.
Yeah, real quickly. Yeah, there's a link to apply to use the Judith Taylor space on the Arcadia Exhibitions website under About. And I can tell you that Patch and I are working very preliminarily on a virtual Judith Taylor gallery. So hopefully there'll be more details about that. But like I say, we strongly encourage students who are interested in exhibiting their work and we try to create as many opportunities for that as possible.
Thank you, Matt.
Anything else we got in the chat there, Jamar?
It's pretty dry right now, but maybe can you guys give a plug for social media? And
Absolutely, and I'll start. But I don't know how many of you know Molly Foster, who's the curatorial assistant for the program. She has been bringing us into the 21st century in the last 2 or 3 years by basically adding an arm to the exhibition program that we never really used properly. I will admit to being maybe past my prime, and I'm maybe one of the only persons staring at the screen that doesn't have a Facebook page. I don't know how to use this stuff, and I still don't understand all of it. But Molly has sort of been able to post about our program pretty consistently, and has built up the audience from, you know, a very paltry, I don't know, some of the first posts were very sadly responded to, and now we have over how many viewers or people follow? It's growing, and
we're coming up on 900.
Wow, which is that's absolutely revolutionary for me. And maybe what I want to say, because I mean, as somebody who's a certain age, when I first started to work at Arcadia and try to get people to come to the gallery and get the shows reviewed, all of this happened in print. It was, you know, it sounds very quaint right now, but the way in which the shows were discussed was basically by mouth or by press response in the newspaper. Before the internet, there was just none of this conversation that was happening. And I will admit to being very slow to recognize the power of the internet as a way to create a space that goes to confirm sort of what I said before. Going back to that Robert, the Samuel Morse painting, one of the beautiful things about that painting is that it introduced to American audiences for the first time images of work that was in the Louvre. That was its goal. And now the internet itself has become, you know, it is an exhibition space. Websites are exhibition spaces, as it were. But so that the posts that Molly's been doing for us are a way to sort of extend the footprint of the program outside of the physical space, and a time right now when we need more of this, and as a way to keep what we're doing active, and, you know, get us ready for when we're finally going, when we return to the physical spaces. I think we'll return feeling like we're bringing in a lot more people than we had before, which is sort of one of the silver linings that we could talk about. Anything you want to add?
We have time for one more question that just came in.
Mm-hmm.
This is a great question. What is the size restraint if you are putting pieces in an exhibit? How much space can someone take up? And I read that to for it to say just in general, or for the gallery spaces?
Well, I mean, one way to answer that question is to get an estimate of the doorway. But as we know from even those Post-it notes.
I'm sorry, Richard, for spaces in general.
Oh, it has to do with the work, you know. In a way, you can, if it's a physical sculpture that can't be dismantled, it has to be smaller than the doorway. But otherwise, you know, there are ways to build things inside the gallery, which is what we've done many times. So that
Molly, are you trying to show the potholder here? The giant potholder?
So yeah, I mean, the scale thing it's more complicated, but it really depends on what your medium would be. But we like big things. We also like invisible things. We've done things that we've shown radio waves, or had set up a tiny little radio station in the gallery, and put invisible cable across, or painted with mural inside the gallery with fluorescent paint that only glowed at night and was seen by just a handful of people. So it's there's a lot of ways to answer that question. I hope I'm doing it justice.
Okay. That's our time, Richard, if you want to wrap.
Yeah, so if anything, I hope you have a better sense of our history. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Our website, thanks to Molly and Matt in particular, has become more robust in the past year. That's always a work in progress, but our history is there, and I'm hoping that you'll take some inspiration from that, and remember that it's really up for you all to decide what an exhibition is, and we're counting on especially the new students to sort of help us rethink what that medium is, because you can tell it's still basically up for everyone to determine. And I would look forward to that conversation with each of you if we are able to have it. So thank you for listening and for your questions, and enjoy the class continues till 6, right?